The Galactic Commerce Station hung like a massive metal flower in the darkness of space, its countless lights blinking against the endless void as ships from dozens of worlds came and went through its many docking ports. Danny Cole stood near the observation window of Terminal 7, watching a small transport vessel approach the station. And he could not help but smile because he knew exactly who was on that ship. 2 years had passed since Danny left Earth to serve as a diplomatic representative aboard this station. And in that time he had learned many things about the galaxy and its inhabitants. But the most important lesson was that patience mattered more than strength in the world of interstellar politics. The transport docked with a gentle thud, and moments later, the airlock doors slid open to reveal a young woman with brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Carrying a single bag over her shoulder, Uncle Danny, Katie Brooks called out. Rushing forward to embrace him, Danny laughed and hugged his niece tightly, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months because family had a way of making even the coldest corners of space feel like home. "Look at you," Danny said, stepping back to examine her, all grown up and ready to take on the galaxy. Katie grinned and punched his arm lightly. 3 months of engineering internship, and I plan to learn everything this station has to offer. They walked together through the busy corridors of the station, passing aliens of every shape and size. And Katie's eyes grew wide as she tried to take in all the strange sights around here. A group of Palani merchants glided past on their 4 slender legs, their large eyes blinking curiously at the humans, while a cluster of Mulvari traders argued loudly near a food stall, their tentacles waving in agitation. "This place is incredible," Katie whispered. And Danny nodded in agreement. "It takes some getting used to," he admitted. "But there are a few things you need to understand before you settle in." He guided her toward a quieter corridor and lowered his voice. "The Kovathi run security on this station, and they are not exactly fans of humanity." Katie frowned. "Why not?" "They see us as weak," Danny explained. "The Korvathi are a warrior species, and they judge everyone by physical strength alone. And since humans are smaller and softer than most species here, they assume we are inferior." "That seems pretty narrow-minded," Katie said, with a hint of irritation in her voice. Danny shrugged. "It is what it is, and the best way to handle them is to stay calm and not react to their insults. Because diplomacy requires patience, as if the universe wanted to prove his point." A group of Korvathi guards rounded the corner at that exact moment, their heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor like thunder. The Korvathi were impressive creatures, standing over 7 feet tall with thick reptilian scales covering their bodies like natural armor, and their eyes glowed faintly yellow as they scanned everyone they passed. Commander Vrylox led the group, his scarred face and decorated uniform marking him as the leader of the station's elite guard unit. And when he spotted Danny, a thin smile spread across his face. "Ah, the human diplomat," Vrylox said in his deep rumbling voice. "I see you have brought another soft creature to our station." Danny kept his expression neutral. "This is my niece Katie, Commander, and she is here for the engineering internship program." Vrylox looked down at Katie with obvious disdain. "Engineering requires strength to work with heavy machinery, and I do not think this little one could lift a tool case without struggling." The other Korvathi guards laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the metal walls. Katie opened her mouth to respond, but Danny placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, silently asking her to let it go. "We appreciate your concern, Commander," Danny said smoothly, "but I assure you she is quite capable." Vrylox snorted and continued walking, his guards following close behind, but he called back over his shoulder. "There is a welcome reception tonight in the main hall, human, and you should attend because Ambassador Drenek wishes to speak with you." Once the Kovathi were out of earshot, Katie turned to her uncle with fire in her eyes. "Why did you let them talk to us like that?" Because proving ourselves through actions matters more than reacting to insults, Danny replied calmly. Come on, let me show you to your quarters. That evening, the main hall of the station was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all gathered for the welcome reception that marked the beginning of a new trade. Cycle Danny and Katie stood near the edge of the crowd, watching as aliens mingled and exchanged pleasantries in various languages. Kolvathi had set up a demonstration area in the center of the hall, where their warriors were showing off their strength by crushing metal objects with their bare hands. And the crowd watched with a mixture of awe and fear. Ambassador Drenak, an older Kolvathi with silver scales and cold calculating eyes, approached the podium and raised his clawed hand for silence. Welcome, honored guests, Drenak announced, his voice carrying easily through the hall. Tonight we celebrate the diversity of our great galactic union, though I must confess that I sometimes wonder about the standards we use for membership. His gaze drifted toward Danny and Katie, and several aliens in the crowd followed his look. Humans, for example, Drenak continued, are soft creatures from a forgettable world. I question why the Galactic Council allows them to participate in interstellar affairs when they can barely lift their own luggage. Laughter rippled through portions of the crowd, and Katie felt her face flush with anger. Danny remained perfectly still, his expression giving nothing away. Perhaps, Drenak said with a cruel smile, our human friends would like to demonstrate their famous diplomatic skills by participating in tomorrow's cultural exhibition, and we can see for ourselves what they have to offer. Commander Vralox stepped forward. I would be honored to challenge the human diplomat to a friendly strength test, Ambassador, so that we might better understand our allies. The crowd murmured with interest, and all eyes turned to Danny. Katie grabbed her uncle's arm, whispering urgently, you do not have to do this. But Danny simply smiled and stepped forward. I would be happy to participate, Commander. I look forward to the cultural exhibition tomorrow. Vralox's eyes gleamed with anticipation, clearly already imagining the humiliation he would inflict on the human. As Danny and Katie left the reception later that night, Katie could not contain her frustration any longer. They are setting you up to fail in front of everyone, and you just agreed to it like it was nothing. Danny looked at his niece with a knowing expression. Sometimes the best way to change someone's mind is to let them underestimate you first. Katie did not understand what he meant, but something in his tone made her wonder if there was more to her uncle than she realized. And she found herself looking forward to tomorrow with a strange mix of worry and curiosity. The stars outside the observation window seemed to shine a little brighter as they walked back to their quarters. And somewhere in the depths of the station, the Kolvathi were already preparing their demonstration, completely unaware of what they were about to learn about humanity. 3 days had passed since the Vreni refugees arrived at the station, and in that time, Katie had found herself spending every free moment in the refugee processing area. The Vreni were gentle creatures, standing barely 3 feet tall with soft gray skin and enormous dark eyes that seemed to hold all the sorrows of the universe. Katie sat cross-legged on the floor of the shelter, surrounded by a group of Vreni children who watched her with fascination as she showed them pictures of Earth on her tablet. This is called an ocean, she explained, pointing to a vast blue expanse. It covers most of our planet, and inside it live millions of different creatures. One of the children, a small female named Tiri, reached out with her delicate 3-fingered hand to touch the screen. Your world looks beautiful, but also very scary, Katie smiled. It can be both, but we learn to live with the scary parts. An older Vreni named Elder Mavis approached and placed a gentle hand on Katie's shoulder. You have been so kind to us, young human, and we are grateful for your company. It is the least I can do, Katie replied. I just wish I could do more to help you. Elder Mavis's eyes grew sad. The Drukhari have hunted our people for generations. taking us as slaves and workers for their mining colonies. And we thought we had finally escaped when we reached this station. You are safe here, Katie assured him, though even as she said the words, she was not entirely certain they were true. The Kovathi had been completely unhelpful since the refugees arrived, providing only the minimum required assistance, while Ambassador Dranek worked behind the scenes to have them removed from the station. Danny had been fighting the political battle every day, attending meetings and filing formal protests. But progress was painfully slow. Katie was just about to show the children more pictures when the station's alarms began screaming. A harsh wailing sound that made the Rennie refugees cry out in terror. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the shelter, and urgent announcements echoed through the speakers in a dozen languages. Warning: unauthorized vessel has docked at Port 19. All security personnel report immediately. Katie jumped to her feet and activated her communicator. Uncle Danny, what is happening? Danny's voice crackled through the device, tense and worried. A Drakari raiding ship has forced its way onto the station, and they are claiming the refugees as their property. Katie felt her blood run cold as she looked at the frightened Vreni around her. They cannot do that, can they? I am trying to stop them through diplomatic channels, Danny replied, but the Kovathi are not cooperating. So stay with the refugees and keep them calm until I can sort this out. The communication ended, and Katie turned to face the terrified Rennie. Everyone stay together, she said firmly. I will not let anything happen to you. Elder Mavis shook his head sadly. You do not understand, child. The Drakari are brutal creatures who care nothing for laws or diplomacy, and they will take what they want regardless of what anyone says, as if to prove his words. The sound of heavy footsteps began echoing through the corridor outside the shelter, accompanied by harsh guttural voices speaking in a language Katie did not recognize through the shelter's window. Katie saw Commander Vrylox and his guards marching away from the refugee area, their backs turned to the approaching threat. Where are you going? Katie shouted through the glass. Vrylox paused and looked back at her with an expression of cold indifference. Ambassador Dranek has ordered us to stand down, as fighting the Drakari would damage important trade relationships. You are supposed to protect these people. Katie screamed. They are not our people. Vrylox replied simply before continuing his retreat. Katie watched in disbelief as the Kovathi security forces abandoned their posts one by one. Leaving the refugee shelter completely undefended, the Vreni began to panic, their high-pitched cries filling the air as they huddled together in the center of the room. Little Tiri grabbed Katie's hand and looked up at her with tear-filled eyes. Are the bad ones coming for us? Katie knelt down and held the child's face gently. I will not let them take you. I promise. She stood and walked to the shelter entrance, positioning herself directly in front of the door as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Elder Mavis's rushed to her side. What are you doing, child? You cannot fight the Drakari alone. Maybe not, Katie admitted, but I can make sure they have to go through me first. The Drakari appeared at the end of the corridor, and Katie felt her heart pound against her ribs as she got her first look at the creatures who had terrorized the Vreni. For so long, they were massive beings, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with thick muscular bodies covered in dark scaly hide. And their faces were nightmarish combinations of reptile and insect features with multiple eyes and mandibles that clicked together. As they spoke, spiked battle armor covered their bodies, and they carried cruel-looking weapons that hummed with energy. The leader of the group, a particularly large Drakari with scars covering half his face, pushed his way to the front and stopped when he saw Katie standing in the doorway. What is this? He growled, his voice like gravel scraping against metal. Katie stood her ground. These refugees are under the protection of the Galactic Union, and you have no right to take them. The Drakari captain threw back his head and laughed, a horrible sound that made Katie's skin crawl. Protection? I see no protectors here, little creature. only a small soft thing blocking my path. He stepped closer, looming over Katie like a mountain of muscle and armor. Move aside, or I will crush you and step over what remains. Katie looked up at the monster towering above her and felt fear coursing through every part of her body. But she also felt something else rising up from deep within her. She thought about her uncle's words, about how humans were Deathworlders who evolved on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. She thought about the frightened children behind her, counting on her to keep her promise, and she thought about how the Kovati had mocked humans for being weak, when in reality, humans had simply chosen not to show their true strength. The Drakari captain grew impatient with her silence. This is your last warning. Small one. Katie planted her feet firmly on the ground and looked directly into the captain's multiple eyes. No, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. This is yours. Behind her, the Vreni watched in terrified silence as the young human girl stood, alone against the pirates who had haunted their nightmares for generations. And somewhere in the station, Danny was running as fast as he could toward the refugee shelter, knowing exactly what was about to happen and praying he would arrive in time to help his niece face the storm that was coming. The central plaza of the Galactic Commerce Station had been transformed into a grand exhibition space, with colorful banners hanging from the high ceiling and crowds of aliens gathered around various demonstration areas. Katie walked beside her uncle through the busy plaza, watching as different species showcased their unique abilities and cultural traditions. The Pilani had set up an intricate light display that told stories through shifting colors and patterns, while the Movari demonstrated their ability to change the texture of their skin to blend with any surface. But the largest crowd by far had gathered around the Kovati demonstration area, where Commander Vrylox and his warriors stood beside a massive display of traditional armor plates. Those plates are made from Kovati battle steel, Danny explained quietly to Katie. They claim it is the strongest material in the galaxy, and they use these demonstrations to prove their superiority. Katie watched as a large insectoid alien stepped up to one of the plates and struck it with all 6 of its arms. But the plate barely registered any impact on the measurement device attached to it. The Kovati crowd cheered while the insectoid slunk away in embarrassment. Pathetic, Vrylox announced loudly. Is there no species in this galaxy that can challenge Kovati's strength? His yellow eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Danny, and a predatory smile spread across his scaled face. Ah, our human friend has arrived, Vrylox called out, gesturing for Danny to approach. Come, diplomat. Let us see what the famous humans are made of. Danny squeezed Katie's hand reassuringly before walking forward to join Vrylox at the demonstration area. The crowd parted to let him through, and Katie could hear whispers and laughter from the aliens around her. This should be amusing, a Kovati guard muttered nearby. Not bothering to lower his voice, Vrylox made a grand show of presenting Danny to the assembled crowd. Honored guests, today we have a special treat. As Earth's own representative will demonstrate human strength for us all. He gestured to one of the armor plates, which had been mounted on a sturdy stand with sensors attached to measure the force of any impact. The rules are simple, Vrylox explained. Strike the plate as hard as you can, and the sensors will record your strength for all to see. Danny nodded and rolled up his sleeve, revealing a muscular arm that seemed unimpressive compared to the massive limbs of the Kovati warriors. Katie pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her heart pounding with anxiety as she watched her uncle prepare. Danny took a breath, centered himself, and delivered a solid punch to the armor plate. The impact made a dull thud, and the measurement device flickered briefly before displaying a number that was laughably low compared to the Kovati results. The crowd erupted in laughter, and Vrylox's warriors slapped their tails against the floor in a Kovati expression of mockery. Remarkable, Vrylox said with exaggerated amazement. I believe my youngest hatchling could strike harder than that. Ambassador Dranek stepped forward from somewhere in the crowd, his silver scales gleaming under the plaza lights. As I said last night, humans are simply not suited for any meaningful role in galactic affairs. And this demonstration proves my point perfectly. He turned to address the crowd directly. I propose that humans be relegated to administrative duties only, as they clearly lack the physical capability to contribute to galactic defense or exploration. Several alien delegates nodded in agreement. And Katie felt sick to her stomach, but she noticed something that everyone else seemed to ignore. There was a small mark on the armor plate where Danny's fist had connected. A tiny indentation that should not have been possible if his punch was truly as weak as the sensors. Suggested Vrax noticed Katie staring and quickly moved to block her view. "Thank you for participating, human, and please do not feel too embarrassed by your performance." He patted Danny on the shoulder with enough force to make a normal person stumble. But Danny barely moved, absorbing the impact without any visible reaction. Katie saw this too, and her confusion deepened. The crowd began to disperse as the demonstration ended, and Danny walked back to join his niece with a calm expression that revealed nothing. "That was humiliating," Katie said as they walked away from the plaza. "And you did not even try your hardest, did you?" Danny glanced around to make sure no one was listening before leading Katie to a quiet alcove near the observation windows. "What makes you think I was not trying?" he asked with a slight smile. "I saw the mark you left on the plate," Katie replied. "And I saw how you did not move when Verlox pushed you. And none of that matches what the sensors showed." Danny studied his niece for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You are more observant than most, Katie, and I suppose you deserve to know the truth." He leaned against the window and looked out at the stars. "Humans are what the galaxy calls Deathworlders, because Earth is one of the most hostile environments for life in the known universe." Katie frowned in confusion. "But Earth seems normal to us." "Exactly," Danny said. "To us it seems normal, but to most species in the galaxy, Earth is a nightmare of extreme gravity, toxic atmosphere, violent weather, and deadly predators. And the fact that humans evolved to thrive there makes us incredibly strong by galactic standards. Then why did you hold back?" Katie demanded. "Why let them mock us like that?" "Because humanity made a choice when we reached the stars," Danny explained. "We looked at our history, at all the wars and violence and suffering we caused each other, and we decided to be different out here, to earn respect through diplomacy and cooperation rather than intimidation." Katie struggled to understand. "So we pretend to be weak?" "We choose not to display our strength," Danny corrected gently. "There is a difference. And the hope is that other species will come to respect us for our minds and our values, rather than fear us for our bodies." He sighed and rubbed his eyes. "Though I admit that sometimes I wonder if the strategy is working." Before Katie could respond, an alarm began blaring throughout the station, and urgent announcements echoed through the corridors in multiple languages. Danny's communicator buzzed, and he read the message with a troubled expression. "A ship full of Rennie refugees has arrived at the station, and they are seeking asylum from space pirates." "Rennie?" Katie asked. "A small, peaceful species from the outer rim," Danny explained as they hurried toward the refugee processing area. "They have been hunted by Drakari pirates for years, and it seems some of them have finally escaped." When they arrived at the processing area, Katie saw dozens of small, fragile-looking creatures huddled together in fear, their large eyes wet with tears, and their thin limbs trembling. Commander Vralox and his guards stood nearby, but they made no move to help or comfort the refugees. "This is not our concern," Vralox announced coldly when Danny approached. "Ambassador Dranek has decided that harboring these refugees could damage our trade relations with the Drakari." Danny's jaw tightened. "These people are terrified and in need of protection. Then, perhaps the mighty humans can protect them." Vrlock said with a mocking laugh before turning and walking away with his guards. Katie watched the Corvathi leave. And for the first time since arriving at the station, she began to understand why her uncle had been so patient. With their insults, it was not weakness that made Danny hold back. It was the knowledge that true strength meant nothing if you did not use it to help those who could not help themselves. And looking at the frightened Vreni refugees, Katie knew that sooner or later, someone would have to stand up for them. She just did not know yet that the someone would be her. The Drakari captain stared down at Katie with a mixture of amusement and annoyance, his mandibles clicking together as he considered the small human blocking his path. "You have courage, little one," he admitted, "but courage without strength is just foolishness." He gestured to one of his warriors, a massive Drakari with armor covered in trophy marks. "Remove this obstacle, and try not to make too much of a mess." The warrior stepped forward with a cruel smile, his clawed hand reaching for Katie like she was nothing more than an annoying insect to be swatted aside. What happened next would be talked about across the galaxy for years to come. Katie grabbed the warrior's wrist before his claws could touch her, and with a sharp twisting motion that came from pure instinct, she wrenched his arm to the side. Sound of cracking filled the corridor as the Drakari's armor plating shattered under the pressure of her grip. The warrior screamed in shock and pain, a sound that no one had ever heard a Drakari make before anyone could react. Katie released his wrist and drove her fist directly into the center of his chest plate. The armor, which was supposedly strong enough to stop energy weapons, exploded into fragments under the impact of her punch. The warrior flew backward and crashed into his companions, knocking several of them to the ground before sliding to a stop against the far wall. Silence filled the corridor as every Drakari stared at Katie in complete disbelief. Captain's multiple eyes blinked rapidly as his brain struggled to process what he had just witnessed. "What are you?" Katie flexed her fingers, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins like fire. "I am human," the captain roared in fury and charged at her himself, his massive body moving with surprising speed as he swung a clawed fist toward her head. Katie ducked under the blow and countered with a punch to his midsection that dented his armor and drove the air from his lungs. He staggered backward, gasping, and Katie pressed her advantage with a kick to his knee that buckled the joint and sent him down to one leg. "Impossible," he wheezed. "Humans are supposed to be weak. You were lied to." A voice called from behind the Dracarida. Nicole came running down the corridor, and without breaking stride, he leaped over the fallen warriors and landed beside his niece. "Took you long enough," Katie said with a grim smile. "Traffic was terrible," Danny replied, cracking his knuckles as he faced the remaining Drakari. "Ready for some family bonding?" The Drakari captain struggled back to his feet, rage burning in his eyes. "Kill them both." The pirates charged, and the corridor erupted into chaos. Danny and Katie fought side by side, their movements complementing each other perfectly despite never having trained together. Danny's style was precise and controlled, using his military training to target weak points in the Drakari armor while conserving his energy for maximum efficiency. Katie's approach was more instinctive but equally devastating. Her raw strength from growing up on Earth, allowing her to punch through armor that should have been impenetrable. Drakari swung a blade at Danny's head, but he caught the weapon mid-swing and snapped it in half before driving his elbow into the pirate's throat. Katie grabbed another warrior by his armor straps and threw him bodily into a group of his companions, sending them all crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs and weapons. The Drakari simply could not understand what was happening. They had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, and none had ever posed a physical threat to their armored warriors. But these two humans, these small, soft creatures that everyone had dismissed as weak, were tearing through their ranks like they were made of paper in the station's command center. Elder Torvine watched the security footage with wide, unblinking eyes. The Polani Council member had always been curious about humanity, sensing that there was more to them than they revealed. Now that suspicion was being confirmed in the most dramatic way possible by the ancient lights, Torvine whispered, "They have been hiding this from us all along." Commander Vralock stood nearby, having been summoned to the command center when the fighting started, and his yellow eyes were fixed on the screen with an expression of shock. "That girl," he said slowly. "Her punch readings at the exhibition, they must have been falsified somehow." "No," Elder Torvine replied thoughtfully. "I believe the readings were accurate, but only because she was holding back her true strength." Back in the corridor, the battle was reaching its end then. He pinned the Drakari captain against the wall with one hand while Katie stood guard over the pile of defeated warriors. The captain struggled against Danny's grip, but no matter how hard he pushed, he could not break free. "How is this possible?" the captain demanded, blood dripping from a gash on his face where Katie had struck him. "Why do humans pretend to be weak when you have this kind of power?" Danny leaned in close, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Because we have seen what happens when the strong use their power to dominate the weak. And we decided long ago that we would never become that kind of monster." He tightened his grip on the captain's armor. "We wanted to be trusted, not feared, and we believed that if we showed restraint, other species would come to respect us for who we are, rather than what we can do." The captain spat at him. "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard." "Maybe," Danny admitted. "But when innocent lives are threatened, we show what we truly are." He released the captain and stepped back. "Take your crew and leave this station, and spread the word to every Drakari in the galaxy that the Vreni are now under human protection." The captain looked at his defeated warriors, at the shattered armor and broken weapons scattered across the floor, and something in his eyes shifted from rage to a grudging respect. "You could have killed us all," he said quietly. Katie stepped forward, her fists still clenched but her voice steady. "We could have, but we chose not to, because that is what makes us different from you." The captain studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I will deliver your message, human, but I warn you that others will come to test your strength." "Let them come," Katie replied. "We will be ready." The Drakari gathered their wounded and retreated to their ship, their pride broken, but their lives spared by enemies who had every reason to destroy them, as the pirate vessel undocked and fled into space. Danny put his arm around Katie's shoulders. "You did good today." Kid Katie looked back at the shelter where the Vreni refugees were emerging with expressions of wonder and hope. "I just did what any human would do." Danny smiled. "And that is exactly why humanity will always be underestimated. Because most species cannot imagine choosing mercy when you have the power to destroy." Little Teary came running out of the shelter and threw her arms around Katie's legs. "You saved us. You really saved us." Katie knelt down and hugged the child. "I made you a promise, remember?" Behind them, the station's security cameras recorded everything, and the footage was already spreading across the galactic network. The galaxy was about to learn the truth about humanity, and nothing would ever be the same. The aftermath of the battle sent shockwaves through every corner of the Galactic Commerce Station and far beyond security. Footage of Katie shattering Drakari armor with her bare fists spread across the galactic network within hours, and species that had dismissed humans for decades suddenly found themselves watching the recordings over and over in stunned disbelief in the station's council chambers. An emergency session had been called to address what everyone was now calling the human incident. Danny stood at the center of the chamber with Katie beside him, facing a semicircle of alien delegates who looked at them with expressions ranging from fear to fascination. Elder Torvine of the Polani presided over the meeting, his large eyes studying the two humans with intense curiosity. Ambassador Cole, would you care to explain why humanity has been deceiving the galactic community about your true physical capabilities? Danny took a deep breath before responding. We were not deceiving anyone, Elder. We were simply choosing not to display abilities that we felt were irrelevant to our goals. Ambassador Drenek rose from his seat, his silver scales bristling with agitation. Irrelevant? You have been hiding the fact that humans are Death Warders this entire time. And that seems like a rather significant deception to me. We hide nothing, Danny replied calmly. Earth's classification as a death world is publicly available information in the Galactic database. And anyone who cared to research humanity could have learned the truth at any time. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates as they realized he was right. The information had always been there. But no one had bothered to look because they assumed humans were too insignificant to warrant investigation. Commander Vrylox stepped forward from his position near the door. I have a question for the human female. Katie straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. Ask, at the cultural exhibition, you watched your uncle accept humiliation without fighting back, Vrylox said slowly. And yet, when the Drakari threatened the refugees, you revealed your true strength without hesitation. So why the difference? Katie considered the question carefully before answering. Because my uncle's pride is not worth more than the trust we are trying to build. But innocent lives are worth everything. Vrylox tilted his head, processing her words. So you would endure any insult or mockery directed at yourselves. But the moment someone threatens those you protect, you become warriors? That is exactly right, Katie confirmed. Humans do not fight for glory or pride or dominance. And we definitely do not fight to prove how strong we are. But we will fight to the death for people who cannot defend themselves. The chamber fell silent as the weight of her words settled over the delegate. Elder Torving spoke again, his voice thoughtful. I believe I am beginning to understand, and if I may say so, this philosophy represents something quite remarkable. He rose from his seat and addressed the full council. For generations, the Korvathi have dominated this station through displays of strength. And we have all accepted their authority because we believed that power determined worth. His gaze swept across the room, lingering on Ambassador Drenek. But these humans have shown us something different. Because they possessed the strength to dominate from the very beginning. Yet they chose partnership over conquest and trust over fear. Drenek scoffed. Pretty words, but strength is still strength. And now that we know what humans are capable of, how can we be certain they will not turn that power against us? Danny stepped forward. Because we have had that power for our entire history, Ambassador. And we have seen firsthand what happens when it is used to oppress and destroy. His voice carried the weight of human history, of wars and atrocities, and all the darkness that humanity had inflicted upon itself over thousands of years. We reached the stars carrying the memory of every terrible thing we ever did to each other. And we swore that we would not bring that legacy with us into the galaxy, Katie added. We want friends, not subjects, and we want to be part of something greater than ourselves. Not rulers of it. Elder Torvin nodded slowly. I move that this council vote to elevate humanity's status within the Galactic Union. Not because they have proven their strength, but because they have proven their character. The vote was called, and one by one the delegates signaled their approval. Even some of the Korvathi voted in favor, though Drenek conspicuously abstained, but the most significant vote came next. Furthermore, Elder Torving continued, I propose that the Vreni refugees be granted permanent protected status under a new humanitarian accord, with humanity serving as their official guarantors. This vote passed unanimously, and somewhere in the refugee shelter, the Vreni learned that they would never have to run again after the council session ended. Rox approached Danny in the corridor outside the chambers. I owe you an apology. Human, the Korvathi commander said gruffly. I mocked you and your kind because I thought you were weak. And I was wrong." Danny extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship. "You judged us by your own standards, Commander, and we gave you no reason to think differently." Vralox looked at the offered hand for a moment before clasping it in his own massive grip. "Perhaps our standards need to change." Meanwhile, Katie found herself surrounded by a group of young Korvathi warriors who had been watching the council proceedings. "Human," one of them said hesitantly. "We have a request." Katie raised an eyebrow. "What kind of request?" "We wish to learn from you," the young warrior continued. "Not just how humans fight, but how humans think. Because we have spent our whole lives believing that strength was the only thing that mattered." Another warrior added, "You showed us that there is more to being a warrior than breaking things. And we want to understand." Katie smiled and gestured for them to follow her. "Come on then, class is in session." As she walked away with her new students, Danny watched with pride swelling in his chest. This was what humanity had hoped for when they chose the path of diplomacy over intimidation, not to hide their strength forever, but to earn enough trust that when they finally revealed it, other species would see them as protectors rather than conquerors. Later that evening, Danny received a transmission from Earth Command. The broadcasts from the station are being picked up everywhere. The Admiral on the screen reported, "Humanity is trending across the entire galactic network. Is that good or bad?" Danny asked. The Admiral smiled. "Both, probably. But we also intercepted a transmission from Drakari space that you might find interesting." She played the recording, and Danny listened as Drakari captains warned each other to avoid any system with human presence. "The soft creatures are not soft," one captain growled. "They are monsters wearing the skin of prey, and any who attack their protected worlds will be destroyed." Danny laughed softly and looked out the observation window at the stars. Humanity had not wanted to be feared, but perhaps a little fear would help keep the peace until other species learned to see them as partners. And in the refugee shelter, Katie sat with little Tiri on her lap, telling stories about Earth to a crowd of Rennie children who listened with wonder in their eyes. "On our world," Katie said, "we have a saying that the strong should protect the weak. And that is what humans will always try to do." Tiri hugged her tightly. "Will you always protect us?" Katie held the child close and made a promise that humanity would keep for generations to come. Always. The galaxy had finally learned the truth about the quiet diplomatic humans who smiled at insults and held back their strength. They were perhaps the most dangerous species in existence, not because they sought conflict, but because they would never back down when protecting the innocent. And that made all the difference.